Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Now, this is the third part of our discussion regarding thyroid and antithyroids. In the previous two lectures, in the first part, we discussed the drugs useful in hypothyroidism, while in the second part, we started our discussion regarding the drugs used as antithyroid, used in hyperthyroidism, in which we discuss up till now, apart from classification etc., the thiamides we have discussed in that part. Now, in this third part, we will discuss the remaining drugs used as antithyroid. Again, diagrammatically, this was the different sites of action of these antithyroid drugs. First, at the level of transport, anionic, percolated, etc., and then the thiamides, iodides, thiamides, etc., at the level of this active form of iodide, and then the organification, and then the third iodides will, apart from the first two, it also inhibit the proteolysis and the release of T3 and T4, and the fourth one usually act at the level of peripheral metabolism of T4 into T3. Again, although thiamides are mainly having effects at the level of active formation of iodides and the organification, but also has effects at the level of peripheral tissue. Similarly, radiocontrast medias, beta blockers, corticosteroids, and amiodarone also, which we have already discussed as antiarrhythmic under the heading of potassium channel blocker. So, after this diagrammatic revision, let's start with the discussion of the remaining groups apart from thiamides, and now the anion inhibitors. So, as we have seen in the classification, these are basically monovalent anions, and the important drugs up till now are 3-perchlorate, pertechnetate, and thiocyanate. As we have seen in the diagram also, they can block the uptake of iodide by the gland through the competitive inhibition of the iodide transport mechanism. It's important. Now, because it's a competitive inhibition of the transport mechanism, so as usual we have discussed in the general pharmacology and at other groups, wherever there is competition, that means this competition is with this iodine. So, we block this iodide. If we increase the concentration of iodide, this mechanism of anion inhibitors will be nullified or accordingly will be reduced. So, as I have told you, because these effects can be overcome by large doses of iodide, so their effectiveness is unpredictable depending upon the how much iodine intake is also there. The major clinical uses of these, especially the potassium perchlorate, that is to block the thyroidal reuptake of iodide in patient with iodide induced hyperthyroidism. For example, an amiodarone induced hyperthyroidism, we discussed in amiodarone, under discussion of amiodarone, it gets accumulated in the thyroid gland and it can produce both types of effect, hypo and hyperthyroidism. In the hyperthyroidism, this amiodarone actually produces increased iodide effects in the gland, and in this way iodide-induced hyperthyroidism occurs with amiodarone. So, in such cases potassium perchlorate can be used. But another important point is that with the use of this potassium perchlorate, although rarely, but it is associated with the aplastic anemia. It can induce aplastic anemia, in which obviously especially the deficiency of RBCs is there. Now the next important group is the iodides. Remember, this group iodides were very much useful in about up to 1940s, prior to the introduction of thiamides as anti-thyroid group. So before thiamides, these iodides were the major anti-thyroid agents. So due to invention of the better tolerable and better useful drugs of thiamides, the use of iodides have been reduced as a sole therapy very less. However, it can be added along with other anti-thyroid groups. Regarding pharmacodynamics of iodides, iodides inhibit the organification and the hormone release as thiamides. And another important effect of these iodides are that they decrease the size, not only was, still it can produce the same effect also. It decreases the size and vascularity of the gland, especially when there is hyperplasia. Hyperplastic gland, remember this thyroid gland is a normally very highly vascular organ, and this vascularity increases if the number of cells is increased, hyperplasia occurs. Sizes of the gland also increases, but the vascularity especially. This vascularity is very important because during operation, this vascularity can lead to produce severe bleeding intraoperatively. So to avoid that, usually we first of all prepare this patient, prepare the gland preoperatively to decrease the vascularity of the gland, so that during surgery this intraoperative bleeding should be minimized. So iodides have the capability not only to decrease the size but also to reduce the vascularity of the hyperplastic gland also, and very valuable as preoperative preparation for the surgery. In its pharmacological dosage, which is about usually more than 6 mg per day, these iodides inhibit hormone release and possibly through the inhibition of the thyroglobulin proteolysis, as we have seen in the diagram. What we have seen, if a patient is suffering from thyrotoxicosis, with the use of pharmacological dose of use of these iodides, we have seen improvement in the thyrotoxic symptom within 2 to 7 days. So that is the reason these iodides are very useful in thyroid storm, especially severe acute emergency of hyperthyroidism. Sometimes in susceptible patients, these iodides can induce itself hyperthyroidism. This was observed first of all George Basedow. That is why it is known after his name, George Basedow phenomena. Okay. Use of these iodides can induce itself hyperthyroidism. Or opposite, they can suppress so much activity of this gland that they can precipitate even hypothyroidism. So both the condition can occur, but only in susceptible, not all the individuals taking iodides, only in those patients who have the tendency to go under these states. Clinical uses of these iodides. One disadvantage with the iodide therapy we have seen, and that is an increase in intraglandular stores of iodine. Now, this intraglandular stores of iodine may delay the onset of action of thiamide especially, or they can prevent the use of radioactive iodine therapy for several weeks till the stores of iodine is there. So, to avoid that, iodide should be initiated after the onset of thiamide therapy, when the thiamide, which may take 3 to 4 weeks to show their onset of action. So, the use of iodide should be withhold until the onset of this thiamide therapy, and plus at the same time, if we have to use radioactive iodine, we must avoid the use of this iodide. Now, this is again a Viva question and MC questions also. Iodide should not be used alone because the gland will escape from the iodide block in 2 to 8 weeks. Now, escape means that when we are using iodides, they are decreasing the size and vascularity of the gland and decreasing the hyperactivity of the gland. But in few cases we have seen that after continuous use of 2 to 8 weeks, this inhibitory effect is blocked and gland can again start showing hyperactivity. This is known as escape, hyperthyroidism escape, or gland will escape, and its withdrawal may produce severe exacerbation of thyrotoxicosis in an iodine enriched gland. So, if we stop due to this thyroid gland escape, what we see that due to withdrawal of this drug, the gland is already under the escape, so it will produce, can show severe exacerbation of thyrotoxic symptom, especially if the gland is already enriched with the iodine. So, we must be very careful while we are using these iodides. Chronic use of iodides, especially during pregnancy, should be avoided because these iodides, they cross the placenta and can cause fetal goiter. This is one of the contraindication pregnancy. Again, Viva and MCQ question. And in radiation emergencies, the thyroid blocking effects of potassium iodide can protect the gland from subsequent damage if administered before radiation therapy. So, that is also indication of its toxicity of iodides. Remember, adverse reaction of iodine is known as iodism, and these are although uncommon and most of the cases reversible if we discontinue the use of these iodides, but they include acneiform rash. Now, this acneiform rash is similar to adverse effects of bromism. There may be swollen salivary glands, there may be ulceration of the mucous membrane, especially of the mouth and gums, etc. There may be conjunctivitis, inflammation of the conjunctiva, red eye, rhinorrhea, increased flow of nasal secretion. There may be drug fever, allergic reaction leading to development of fever, and that will be reduced only if we withdraw the drug fever. Metallic taste, that also resemble to another drug we will discuss later on, inshallah, metronidazole, under the heading of drugs useful in amoebic dysentery, that also produces metallic taste. Anyhow, then bleeding disorders and rarely anaphylaxis or anaphylactic like reaction, although rarely. Now, radioactive iodine, that is iodine 131. Remember, this iodine 131 is the only isotope which is used for the treatment of thyrotoxicosis, because the other radioactive iodine, iodine 123 and 124, they are used in the diagnosis of the thyrotoxicosis in other respect. Iodine 131 is used therapeutically for thyroid destruction of an overactive or enlarged thyroid gland, and also in the thyroid cancer for the ablation of the thyroid function and treatment of the metastatic diseases. So, this radioactive iodine has about these 4 types of uses: to destroy the thyroid gland in overactive gland, simply enlarged thyroid gland, or thyroid cancer, or if metastasis has occurred. We have an oral solution of these radioactive iodines, and as a sodium salt, sodium iodine 131. When given, it is rapidly absorbed, it gets concentrated in the thyroid gland and also incorporated into the thyroid follicles, storage follicles. When it gets concentrated there, it emits rays, gamma and beta, especially beta. When they are emitted, their effective half-life usually ranges from 5 to 8 days, and their penetration usually ranges from 400 to 2000 micrometer. Within the few weeks of the use of these radioactive iodine 131, destruction of the thyroid parenchyma is evidenced by the pathological changes. There may be epithelial swelling and epithelial necrosis, disruption in the follicular arrangements, there may be local edema, and there may be infiltration of the leukocytes there. These changes can be evidenced with the fine needle aspiration and this biopsy changes. Advantages of this is it's easy to take, effectiveness is there, expenses are very low, and absence of any pain of injection or other procedure. However, it can induce, although very rarely, but radiation-induced genetic damage can occur to the cells. They may also induce leukemia and neoplasia if used for the treatment of hyperthyroidism, although rarely, very rarely. Contraindication of iodine 131, they should not be used in pregnancy and during lactation. So both are the contraindication, the pregnant women and the nursing mothers, because they can cross, these iodine 131 can cross the placenta to destroy the fetal thyroid gland, and also it can be excreted into the breast milk. If taken up by the baby, will affect the thyroid gland of that baby. Androgen receptor blocking agents. Remember, here we use beta blocker without ISA property, without intrinsic sympathomimetic activity. Why? What will happen if we use beta blocker with ISA property? Okay. Actually, we must recall our discussion in the sympathomimetics and the beta blockers. Remember, beta blocker with ISA property means intrinsic sympathomimetic activity. They are actually a sort of partial agonist. Okay, although they are blocking the receptor for the circulating catecholamines, but at the same time they have, although some maximal, but some sympathomimetic activity. If we will use in case of hyperthyroidism, in hyperthyroidism already circulating thyroxine is sensitizing the beta receptors, producing more and more effect. So effects of beta activity will be increased with ISA property. So we should not use those, we should use these beta blockers without ISA property like metoprolol, propranolol, atenolol, etc. in usually effective therapeutic dosages, along with the other management of thyrotoxicosis, as we have discussed the other anti-thyroid drugs. Not only beta blocker, we will add adjunct therapy with the other anti-thyroid drugs. Actually, what happens? Many of the cardiac symptoms, they are usually associated with the thyrotoxicosis, or there may be some independent condition also. In both the conditions, we have to add beta blockers. Propranolol has been the blocker most widely studied and used in therapy of thyrotoxicosis during last so many decades. These beta blocker cause clinical improvement in the hyperthyroid symptoms, but typically do not alter the thyroid hormone levels. However, if we use propranolol at doses more than 160 mg per day, this propranolol can reduce the T3 levels approximately by 20%, especially inhibiting the peripheral conversion of T4 into T3. We have seen peripheral conversion up to 40% T4 is converted into active T3, remaining 40 is inactive, reverse T3. but this active or though both can be approximately 20% reduction by these propranolol. So, less and less T3 will be available to act on the peripheral tissue, because T3 acts on the peripheral tissue and peripheral symptoms of T3 will be reduced.